Let's bring in here Australia's most senior of chief economists, Bill Evans from Westpac. He was appointed in 1991 when Bernie Fraser was still the governor. Philip Lowe is his fourth governor. Bill, thanks for your time. Can I start with this new mandate? If we can have a hard target for inflation, then why can't we have one for employment? What is that they're proposing to me? It seems just a bit wishy-washy.
Ross, I think it's very, very difficult to define a number for full employment. I think that's the problem. We all have a differing view on where full employment is. We think about the so-called NAIRU, that's the level of unemployment below which prices are stable, but below which you get inflation. So I think it's very difficult to define that number, but it does suggest to me that they have two very specific targets now, and it's always difficult to achieve two targets when you only have the one instrument, and that's going to be the difficulty the Reserve Bank has. I think that the inflation target is much better, so that we have an understanding as to where they're preparing to go, rather than go for this on average over the cycle. But Ross, we do have that at the moment. The Reserve Bank produces their forecasts, and at the moment they're telling us that the inflation target will be achieved in the middle of 2025. So they do set out their thinking on when they will achieve their target under the current arrangement.
So then tell me about this separate monetary policy committee, the people who will be on it, the skills that they will bring. Will their processes or the results be any different to what we get now?
Well, I think what they're aiming to do is to clearly get more people who have expertise in monetary policy, economics, particular aspects of the economy. But it is going to be tough because they've talked about each member spending 1 day a week at the bank and being able to pursue their normal jobs at other times. And you'll find that if you want people who are specialists in that area, there is going to be the risk of conflict between sitting on that board and what they do in their day-to-day jobs. It probably means that we'll see more of an emphasis on academics, and there are risks involved in that as well, to have too many academic influence around that table.
So then tell me about even the process around that table when they come to look at the employment side versus looking at the inflation side. Because there are moments, say, for example, now, when higher interest rates inevitably could lead to higher unemployment. It almost seems as though one of these measures, trying to bring inflation back under control, is creating the other, which is higher unemployment.
Well, that's right. So that's why it's very good to aim for that beautiful equilibrium where you're at full employment and you're at the inflation target, but very, very difficult to achieve that, as we've seen. And the Reserve Bank still does have forecasts for the unemployment rate based upon where they're and based upon the assumption behind monetary policy. So we do have some explanation as to what they're thinking at the moment. This is going to be tougher for them to explain if the employment story isn't getting closer to where they think full employment is, and I guess they'll have to start defining that. So it's a worthy set of goals, but they're going to be tough goals to achieve.
OK, what about the communications within the Reserve Bank? The Reserve Bank Governor himself, Philip Lowe, today warned about the problems of over-communication. He says there can be a problem if you don't communicate enough, but he said equally there's a problem if you say too much.
Well, he has been absolutely energetic in terms of the amount of communication that he gives to the market. He's generous in the number of speeches that he gives. He sits on panels, and of course we see the presentations to various political organisations, the Senate and the House of Representatives Economic Committee. I think he communicates quite a lot at the moment. The change here is that we won't have as many board meetings, 8 rather than 11, but we will have a press conference after every meeting. And that'll give him a good opportunity to communicate to the market as soon as more details about the decision. But think about it, they've come a long way in a fairly short period of time. Before Glenn Stevens, the only time that there was even an explanation of the decision was when they changed policy. So we didn't even have an explanation when policy was unchanged. So we've come a long, long way, and this is just another step in that direction.
OK, so then you've got the other aspect of this, and this is the separation of the Reserve Bank from politics. And one of the important hallmarks of this review was it did really advocate, and Jim Chalmers has backed this today, for an independent Reserve Bank. What you do not want is political interference in the processes of the Reserve Bank because, of course, politicians being, politically expedient would be potentially not raising interest rates when sometimes they need to be raised.
Yes, and I think that they've strengthened that independence, and that's to be applauded. And it's very important that the Secretary of the Treasury still remains on the board, and that's unusual given that there are a lot of these other changes are changes that we've already seen in the UK and in Canada in particular. But the Secretary of the Treasury stays on the board. That is unusual, but they've emphasised that he's there as an individual. And I think that the experience and the contacts that he brings makes him a very, very relevant member of that committee based upon the conditions that we're seeing for the other 6 members. So I think that's a good idea, and they'll be able to maintain that.
Okay, just a very, very quick one for you, Bill, and that is, can and should Philip Lowe hang on to his job after September this year?
Ross, look, I don't want to get into that. I think that they'll go through a disciplined process to decide whether Philip is the best man for the job. My experience of Philip as an economist is that I think he's probably the economist that I've learned more from than anyone during my period. Whenever Philip writes something or whenever he gives a speech, there's incredibly valuable insights in that. So from my experience, Philip is a very, very fine economist.
Bill Evans, always good to talk to you. Thank you for your input today.
Thank you.